An old rancher seeks only peace in his quiet land until a ruthless cartel demands his farm. When he refuses, they set his world on fire. But as the ashes settle, they realize too late. He is no ordinary farmer, and his past is deadlier than they ever imagined. The sun had just begun to set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the open fields of Ramon Salgado's ranch. The rhythmic sounds of cattle moving through the pasture and the distant chirping of crickets created an atmosphere of peace, a tranquility he had learned to cherish. Ramon stood by the wooden fence, his weathered hands resting on the rough surface, watching the sky shift into deep shades of orange and purple. The days on his ranch followed a steady rhythm. He rose before dawn, tended to the livestock, repaired what needed fixing, and enjoyed his solitude. It had been this way for years, away from the city, away from the chaos. It was a life of simple work and quiet reflection. But deep in his bones, he knew peace was fragile. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car engine in the distance. He turned, squinting as a cloud of dust rose along the dirt road leading to his house. A few minutes later, a sleek black sedan came to a stop in front of his porch. The door opened, and a young woman stepped out, shaking dust from her clothes. "Uncle Ramon," she called, her voice carrying a mix of relief and worry. Ramon cracked a rare smile. "Camila," she approached, wrapping her arms around him in a warm embrace. "It's been too long," she said, stepping back to examine his face. "You look tired," he chuckled softly. "That's just age catching up with me." Camila frowned. "Or isolation. I don't understand why you insist on staying out here alone." Ramon glanced at the horizon. "Some places are meant for silence." She sighed but didn't press further. Instead, she followed him into the modest house where he brewed coffee while she set the table. They talked about the city, about her job, about everything except the unspoken concern in her eyes. As night settled, a cool wind swept through the fields. Ramon was about to suggest that Camila rest when the low rumble of approaching vehicles sent a chill down his spine. He stood, his expression hardening. Camila followed his gaze out the window, where a line of black SUVs moved toward the house. A knock, loud, deliberate, echoed through the quiet. Ramon moved to the door and opened it slowly. On the porch stood a man he recognized instantly. Hector El Toro Ramirez, a name whispered in fear across the region. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and eyes that gleamed with dangerous intent, Hector exuded authority. Behind him, his men waited, their presence a silent threat. Ramon met his gaze, unflinching. "What brings you here?" Hector smirked. "Business, old man." His voice was calm, but the menace beneath it was clear. "Your land sits in the perfect spot for my operations. I'm here to offer you a deal." Ramon remained still. "Not interested." Hector's smirk faded. "I don't think you understand. This is not a negotiation." Ramon crossed his arms. "And I don't think you understand. I built this ranch with my own hands. I will not give it up." Silence hung between them, thick with unspoken threats. Then Hector leaned in, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "You're an old man living on borrowed time. Don't make this difficult." Ramon didn't blink. "Leave," Hector chuckled, shaking his head. He turned to his men, nodding slightly before stepping back. "You have one night to reconsider. Tomorrow, things will be different." Without another word, they retreated to their vehicles. The sound of engines roaring back to life filled the night as the convoy disappeared into the darkness. Camila exhaled, her voice trembling. "Uncle, who are these people?" Ramon closed the door, his expression unreadable. He already knew. Peace had come to an end. Dawn broke over the ranch, but the air carried an unnatural stillness. Ramon stepped onto the porch, his boots crunching against the dry earth. Camila followed, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. The night's encounter lingered in her mind, a weight she couldn't shake. "Maybe they won't come back," she said, though even she didn't believe it. Ramon didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the land, his sharp gaze noting every detail. The position of the fences, the cattle's movements, the wind shifting the tall grass. But something felt wrong. Then he saw it. The eastern pasture was ruined. Wooden fences had been torn apart, their jagged remains scattered like bones. Smoke still rose from the fields where crops had been set ablaze. His hands clenched into fists. Camila gasped, "No!" Ramon strode forward, his steps steady despite the fury boiling beneath his calm exterior. The smell of burned vegetation filled his nostrils as he knelt beside the scorched earth, running his fingers through the ash. This wasn't just destruction, it was a warning. A A truck rumbled in the distance. Ramon stood as a group of men approached on foot. Leading them was Miguel, Hector's right-hand man. He was younger, lean but strong, his expression filled with amusement as he observed Ramon's reaction. "Morning, old man," Miguel said, a smirk stretching across his face. "Enjoying the view?" Ramon remained silent, his gaze unwavering. Miguel gestured toward the damage. "El Toro sends his regards. He's a man of his word." Camila grabbed Ramon's arm. "Uncle, please, let's leave. This isn't worth it." Miguel laughed. "Listen to the girl. She's got more sense than you." He stepped closer, his voice turning mocking. "You see, Ramon, this land isn't yours anymore. It belongs to El Toro now. You're just too stubborn to accept it." Ramon's expression remained unreadable. He had seen men like Miguel before, young, arrogant, convinced of their own invincibility. But arrogance had a price. Miguel leaned in. "I'll give you one last chance. Walk away, and maybe we'll let you live." Camila tightened her grip on Ramon's arm, but he gently pulled away. He stepped forward, meeting Miguel's eyes. "This land is mine," he said, his voice steady, "and I'm not leaving." Miguel's smirk faltered for just a moment before he scoffed. "Suit yourself." Without warning, he shoved Ramon hard, making him stumble back a step. The men behind him chuckled. Camila gasped, stepping between them. "Enough!" she shouted. "You've made your point. Just go." Miguel tilted his head, considering her for a moment. Then he chuckled. "Fine, we'll go. But don't mistake this for mercy." He turned to his men, giving a casual wave. They climbed into their truck, laughing as they drove off, kicking up dust behind them. Camila turned to Ramon, her eyes filled with desperation. "This is insane. You're fighting a war you can't win. We need to leave before it's too late." Ramon looked at the destruction one last time. Then, without a word, he turned back toward the house. Camila followed, frustrated. "Did you even hear me?" Inside, Ramon moved with quiet efficiency, opening a locked chest in the corner of his room. Camila watched as he pulled out old tools, knives, ropes, heavy gloves, things she didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ramon finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "Preparing." She stared at him, realizing for the first time that there was more to her uncle than she had ever known. The night was quiet, but Ramon knew better. Silence wasn't peace. It was the pause before the storm. He sat on the edge of his bed, oiling an old hunting knife. The weight of it in his hand was familiar, almost comforting. Across the room, Camila paced, her arms crossed, frustration written all over her face. "You're not even considering leaving, are you?" she asked, her voice tense. Ramon didn't look up. "No." She exhaled sharply. "Uncle, they're going to come back. And next time, they won't just burn your fields. They'll do what men like them always do," he interrupted, his tone steady. "They take, they destroy, and if no one stops them, they keep going." Camila ran a hand through her hair. "You talk like you've seen this before." Ramon finally met her gaze. "Because I have." For years, he had buried the past beneath the quiet rhythm of ranch life. But now, the weight of old ghosts pressed against his mind, demanding to be acknowledged. He rose and walked to the window. Beyond the darkened fields, the burned remnants of his crops smoldered under the moonlight. A lifetime ago, he had left war behind, trading bullets for soil, battlefields for open land. But war had found him again. Camila sat on the bed, her voice softer. "What did you do before this?" Ramon didn't answer immediately. He could have lied, could have given her a version of himself that was simpler. But the truth was written in the way he moved, the way he calculated distances, the way he never turned his back to an open door. "I was a soldier," he said finally. "A commander." Camila's breath hitched. "Military?" "Something like that." She stared at him, trying to piece together the man she thought she knew with the one standing before her. "And you just walked away?" Ramon let out a dry chuckle. "No one just walks away. I lost enough men to know that." Camila's hands tightened into fists. "Then why stay here? Why fight them alone?" Ramon turned to her. "Because this is my home, and because some fights you don't run from." She looked down, her emotions a storm of fear, admiration, and confusion. Ramon moved to the back of the house where the storage shed stood, untouched by the fire. He reached under a loose floorboard, pulling out a small, dust-covered crate. Inside, old supplies remained intact. Nylon cords, makeshift tripwires, a rusted but functional field radio. He ran his fingers over them, memories flickering in his mind like distant echoes. Camilla stood in the doorway, watching him. "What is all that?" "Insurance," Ramon said simply. She swallowed hard. "You knew this could happen." "I knew peace is never permanent." As the night stretched on, Ramon worked, placing subtle traps along the paths leading to the house. They weren't meant to stop an army, but they would slow anyone who underestimated him. Camilla finally spoke again. "I don't know if you're brave or insane." Ramon looked at her, a rare glint of amusement in his tired eyes. "A little of both." She sighed. "I'll stay. But if you get yourself killed, I swear I'll never forgive you." He nodded, accepting the terms of their uneasy truce. Outside, the wind shifted. The world remained still, but Ramon knew better. Tomorrow, the war would begin. The wind carried a whisper of change through the ranch, rustling the tall grass and swaying the wooden fence posts. Ramon sat on the porch, sharpening his knife with slow, methodical strokes. He wasn't a man of prayer, but he believed in preparation. The sun had barely begun its ascent when he spotted movement along the dirt road. 3 black SUVs rumbled toward the ranch, kicking up a trail of dust behind them. Ramon exhaled. Hector wasn't here yet. This was a test, a warning shot before the real fight. Camilla stepped out of the house, her eyes widening. "They're back." Ramon nodded. "Stay inside." "But inside, now." She hesitated but obeyed, retreating behind the door as the first SUV came to a stop. A handful of men climbed out, laughing among themselves, as if this were just another job. Ramon recognized one of them, a younger enforcer named Carlos, more bark than bite. Carlos adjusted his leather jacket and smirked. "Morning, old man. El Toro sends his regards." Ramon stood, slow and deliberate. "You've already burned my fields. What now?" Carlos chuckled. "Oh, this isn't about fire. We're just here to remind you that this land ain't yours anymore." 2 of the men approached the barn, yanking the doors open. Another headed toward the chicken coop, kicking at the fencing. Ramon's jaw tightened, but he remained still. Let them think he was weak. Let them make mistakes. Carlos stepped closer, his smirk widening. "You really should have taken the deal, abuelo." Ramon tilted his head. "You really should have paid more attention to where you're standing." Carlos frowned. Then the ground beneath one of the men gave way. A hidden pit, carefully covered, swallowed him whole with a startled yelp. Before the others could react, a tripwire snapped, releasing a cascade of heavy wooden beams from the barn's ceiling. One man barely had time to shout before they struck him down. Panic erupted. The men spun, trying to locate the source of the attack, but Ramon was already moving. He grabbed a metal rod from behind the porch and swung, striking a third man's knee with brutal precision. The man crumpled, screaming. Carlos stumbled backward, drawing his pistol. Ramon was faster. He lunged, twisting the weapon from Carlos's grasp and slamming an elbow into his ribs. Carlos gasped, doubling over. The remaining enforcer bolted toward the SUV, but Ramon wasn't about to let him escape. He grabbed a handful of dirt and flung it into the man's eyes. Blinded, the thug tripped over his fallen companion, hitting the ground with a grunt. Camilla peeked through the door, her face pale. "Uncle, stay inside," Ramon ordered, without looking back. Carlos wheezed, clutching his side. You son of a..." Ramon pressed a boot to his chest, keeping him pinned. "Tell Hector what happened here." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "Tell him this land isn't his, and tell him that if he comes again, I won't stop at warnings." Carlos nodded frantically. Ramon stepped back, allowing him to scramble to his feet. He and the remaining man dragged their wounded into the SUV and sped off, leaving behind 2 broken bodies and the echoes of their own fear. Camilla stepped out, staring at the wreckage. "That was..." Ramon wiped his hands. "Necessary." She swallowed hard. "They'll come back." Ramon nodded, his expression unreadable. "I know." He glanced toward the horizon. The real battle was still ahead. The sun had barely begun its descent when the first sign of trouble appeared. A lone buzzard circled above the ranch, its dark silhouette cutting against the fading sky. Ramon knew better than to ignore omens. Trouble wasn't coming, it was already here. Camilla sat on the porch, her arms wrapped around her knees. She hadn't spoken much since the morning attack, and Ramon understood why. Seeing him fight, seeing him move with precision and purpose had shattered whatever image she once held of him. "Uncle," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "Who were you before this?" Ramon took a deep breath, but before he could answer, the distant hum of engines stole his attention. Headlights flared in the distance, bouncing along the uneven dirt road. This time, there were more of them, a lot more. He counted 5 SUVs, maybe more beyond his sight. Ramon exhaled, steadying himself. "They're here," he said, his voice calm. Camilla shot to her feet, fear flashing in her eyes. "We have to go." Ramon shook his head. "There's nowhere to run." A few minutes later, the convoy came to a stop just beyond the main gate. Doors opened in unison, and men poured out, armed and ready. Then, Hector El Toro Ramirez stepped forward. He was as imposing as ever, broad-shouldered and filled with the confidence of a man who had never met real resistance. His eyes flicked to the bodies of his fallen men, still lying where they had been left. He didn't seem surprised. Instead, he let out a slow, deliberate chuckle. "I have to admit, viejo, I underestimated you." Ramon didn't move. "You did." Hector spread his arms. "You made my men look like fools. I can't let that stand." Ramon's fingers twitched at his side. He had no illusions about how this was going to end. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to make an example of him. One of Hector's men, a wiry enforcer with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and spat on the ground. "Let's just kill him and be done with it." Hector raised a hand, stopping him. "Patience. There's something I want to know first." His gaze shifted toward Camilla, who had frozen in place behind Ramon. "Who's the girl?" Ramon's jaw tightened. "She has nothing to do with this," Hector smirked. "That's not how this works. See, you made this personal. And when things get personal, collateral damage is inevitable." Camilla clutched Ramon's arm. "Uncle, please." He could feel her trembling, but his voice remained steady. "I suggest you leave now." Hector chuckled again. "Or what? You'll kill all of us?" Ramon didn't answer. Hector sighed, shaking his head. "Fine, you want war, viejo? You got it." He snapped his fingers. 2 men raised their rifles, aiming at the house. A moment later, gunfire shattered the silence. The first bullets ripped through the wooden walls, sending splinters flying. Camilla screamed as Ramon grabbed her, pulling her behind cover. Hector's men spread out, advancing toward the ranch with slow, deliberate steps. Ramon's mind worked fast. He couldn't fight them all head-on. He needed to retreat to regroup. He turned to Camilla. "Stay close to me, no matter what." She nodded, her breath shaky but determined. They moved quickly, slipping through the back of the house as bullets continued to tear through the front. The traps Ramon had set earlier wouldn't be enough this time, but they would slow them down. As they disappeared into the shadows of the barn, Ramon knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about defending his land anymore. This was war. Gunfire tore through the night, each shot a reminder that Ramon's world had changed forever. He moved swiftly through the shadows of the barn, guiding Camilla with a firm grip. The scent of hay and old wood mixed with the sharp tang of gunpowder. Outside, Hector's men spread out, their footsteps crunching against dry earth as they swept the property. Ramon crouched near the back wall, peeking through a narrow gap. He counted at least a dozen figures moving in coordinated patterns. Professionals. This wasn't just a warning anymore. Hector had sent killers. Camilla's breath came in short gasps. "Uncle, what do we do?" He turned to her, eyes steady. "We fight smart." Her hands trembled, but she nodded. Ramon moved quickly, reaching for an old wooden ladder leading to the barn's rafters. "Climb, stay up there and don't move until I say." Camilla hesitated. "But, no arguments, do it." Reluctantly, she climbed. Ramon waited until she was out of sight before turning his attention to the weapons at his disposal. A pitchfork, a length of rope, a rusty machete. Not much, but he had never needed much. A shadow moved past the barn doors. Ramon pressed himself against the wall, gripping the machete tight. The door creaked open. A man stepped inside, rifle raised. Ramon moved like a ghost. One swift motion. He grabbed the rifle's barrel, yanked the man forward, and drove the machete into his side. A choked gasp, then silence. Ramon eased the body down, taking the man's weapon. Footsteps approached, another one coming in. Ramon dropped low, lifting a heavy sack of grain from the floor. As soon as the second man entered, Ramon hurled it forward. The sack struck hard, knocking him off balance. Before he could recover, Ramon closed the distance, striking him with the rifle's stock. 2 down. Outside, Hector's voice rang out. "Salgado, enough games. You can't win this." Ramon ignored him. He retrieved extra ammunition from the fallen men and climbed the ladder to where Camilla hid. She clung to the wooden beams, eyes wide. I heard them, she whispered. You... He placed a hand on her shoulder. Not now. More voices outside. They had found the bodies. Mierda, he's picking us off. Hector's patience was running thin. Ramon could hear the frustration in his voice. Burn it down. Camila stiffened. No. Flames sparked at the barn's entrance, licking at the dry wood. Smoke curled toward the rafters. Ramon cursed under his breath. Time to go. He guided Camila along the beams toward an opening near the roof. They climbed out just as the fire spread, its glow casting eerie shadows across the ranch. From their vantage point, Ramon saw the rest of the cartel's men closing in. They had underestimated him before, but now they were coming with full force. His ribs ached, his body worn from the years, but the fire inside him burned just as strong as it had in his youth. Camila turned to him, eyes desperate. This is impossible. Ramon checked the rifle. One magazine. Not enough. He looked at her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Impossible is just another word for difficult. Hector's men advanced, weapons raised. Ramon took a deep breath, and then he moved. The flames crackled below, painting the night in shades of orange and red. Smoke billowed upward, thick and choking, but Ramon barely noticed. His focus remained on the men spreading out across his land, their shadows flickering against the burning barn. He had fought battles in jungles, deserts, and cities, but this was different. This was home. Camila clung to the edge of the rooftop, her breath ragged. Uncle, we can't stay here. Ramon scanned the property. The firelight revealed every movement below. They needed to retreat, regroup, but where? The fields were too open. The tree line was their best bet, but they wouldn't make it far with so many eyes watching. Then a sound broke through the chaos. A low, distant hum, growing louder. Ramon's head snapped toward the source. A truck, not one of Hector's. The vehicle roared down the dirt road, its headlights cutting through the smoke. It skidded to a stop near the house, and before the dust settled, the driver's side door flew open. A man stepped out, tall, built like a machine, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His graying hair was cropped short, his presence exuding authority. Ramon knew that stance, that look of quiet calculation. Valdez. The past had arrived. A shotgun blast tore through the air as Valdez opened fire, catching one of Hector's men square in the chest. The cartel's forces scrambled, ducking behind cover, momentarily thrown off by the sudden assault. Camila's eyes widened. Who the hell is that? Ramon exhaled. An old friend. Valdez's deep voice carried over the gunfire. Salgado, you always did have a way of finding trouble. Ramon didn't hesitate. He helped Camila down from the roof, guiding her toward the truck. Another burst of gunfire cracked through the night as Valdez provided cover, moving with the efficiency of a soldier who had never forgotten the battlefield. The cartel thugs weren't prepared for this. They had come expecting a one-sided slaughter, not a counterattack. Move! Ramon ordered, pushing Camila toward the truck. She scrambled into the back as Ramon slid into the passenger seat. Valdez gunned the engine, tires kicking up dirt as they sped away from the burning ranch. Bullets ricocheted off the metal frame, but Valdez didn't flinch. He maneuvered the vehicle like a predator, weaving through the landscape with ease. Camila gripped the seat, still shaken. Who is he? She asked again. Valdez smirked. Guess your uncle doesn't talk about the good old days, huh? Ramon shot him a glance. They weren't good, Valdez chuckled. No, but they made us who we are. The gunfire faded behind them, the cartel's men forced to regroup. For now, they were safe. But Ramon knew better than to believe in safety. The past had returned, and with it, a truth he had spent years trying to bury. This fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The truck roared down the dirt road, its tires skidding against the uneven terrain. Ramon kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching as the distant glow of his burning ranch faded into the darkness. The land he had spent years protecting was gone, but the war wasn't over. Beside him, Valdez drove with the same calculated precision Ramon remembered from years past. He hadn't changed. Age had taken its toll, but the fire in his eyes remained. Camila, still catching her breath, finally spoke. Someone explain what's happening. Valdez glanced at her through the mirror. Your uncle and I used to be in the same unit, special forces. Good times. Ramon scoffed. There was nothing good about it. Valdez chuckled. You're still the same. Camila frowned. You knew this would happen, didn't you? Ramon didn't answer immediately. I knew peace never lasts. The truck reached an abandoned storage facility on the outskirts of town. Valdez cut the engine, stepping out first. Ramon followed, scanning the perimeter. It was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, Valdez pulled out a worn-out map, laying it across a rusted metal table. Hector won't back down, but we can end this. Ramon crossed his arms. How? Valdez tapped a section on the map. Hector operates out of a warehouse near the border. It's where he keeps his money, his weapons. His entire operation runs from there. He looked up. We burn it down. He's done. Camilla's expression darkened. And you think he'll just sit back and let you? Valdez smirked. That's where the fun begins. Ramon studied the map. It's too well guarded. We'd need a distraction. Valdez grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the next few hours preparing. Ramon adjusted his gear, his movements automatic, muscle memory guiding every action. He hadn't been this man in a long time, but slipping back into old habits was disturbingly easy. Camilla watched in silence before finally asking, "What happens after?" Ramon met her gaze. "There is no after until this is finished." She hesitated, then nodded. "Then let's finish it." They moved before dawn. Valdez had connections, enough to pull together an old truck loaded with explosives. The plan was simple. Ramon and Valdez would infiltrate the warehouse while Camilla set off the diversion, drawing the guards away. As they approached their target, Ramon exhaled slowly. The building stood tall against the dark sky, surrounded by armed men. Hector was inside, confident, untouchable. That was about to change. The truck barreled through the first checkpoint, the explosion shattering the night. As guards scrambled to respond, Ramon and Valdez moved in. Silent, precise, deadly. Inside, chaos erupted. Smoke filled the air as fire spread through the structure. Gunshots echoed through the halls. Then, Ramon found him. Hector stood at the far end of the room, gun in hand, fury in his eyes. "So," Hector sneered, "you just couldn't let it go." Ramon leveled his weapon. "You should have left me alone." Hector smirked. "Then come and finish it." The final battle had begun. The warehouse burned around them, the heat intensifying with every second. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Ramon stood at one end of the room, gun raised, eyes locked onto Hector. The cartel leader wiped a streak of blood from his lip, a cruel grin stretching across his face. "I have to admit, viejo, you've impressed me." Ramon said nothing. He didn't waste words on men like Hector. Miguel, Hector's right-hand man, lay motionless near the overturned crates, his chest riddled with bullet wounds. The battle outside was still raging, but here, in this room, everything had narrowed to one final confrontation. Hector rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck. "You know, I almost regret coming after you. If you were a younger man, I might have tried to recruit you." Ramon's grip on his weapon remained steady. "I don't work for cowards." Hector's smirk twitched, the first sign of real anger breaking through his mask of arrogance. Without another word, he raised his pistol and fired. Ramon dropped low, rolling behind a stack of crates. The bullet splintered the wood inches from where his head had been. Years of experience guided his movements. He fired back, hitting Hector's shoulder. The cartel boss staggered, but didn't fall. Hector laughed through gritted teeth. "Still got fight in you, huh?" He charged, closing the distance in seconds. Ramon barely had time to shift before Hector tackled him, slamming him against a metal shelf. The impact sent pain jolting through his ribs. The gun slipped from his grasp. Hector's fists came fast, brutal, trained. He wasn't just a thug. He knew how to fight. Ramon blocked the first few blows, but the sheer force behind them made his arms ache. A punch connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Hector loomed over him, breathing hard. "You should have stayed retired." Ramon reached for a shard of broken glass nearby. As Hector moved in for the final blow, Ramon struck, slashing across his thigh. Hector roared in pain, stumbling back. Ramon seized the moment, kicking his opponent's wounded leg out from under him. Both men crashed to the ground. Ramon struggled to his feet, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. Hector groaned, trying to push himself up. Ramon retrieved his gun. He aimed it at Hector's chest, his hand unwavering. The cartel boss coughed, smirking despite the pain. "Go on then, be the killer you were always meant to be." Ramon hesitated, not because he had doubts, but because he had spent years trying to leave this part of himself behind. A distant explosion shook the building. Time was running out. Hector sneered. "You don't have it in you, viejo." Ramon exhaled and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the burning warehouse. Hector's body went limp. It was over. Ramon turned and limped toward the exit. Outside, Camila and Valdez were waiting, their faces tense. Camila took one look at him, her eyes scanning his injuries. "Is it done?" Ramon nodded. Valdez smirked. "Good. Now let's get out of here before this whole place goes up." They ran as the flames consumed the cartel's empire. Hector was dead, his men scattered. The war had been won. But Ramon knew peace was never permanent. The flames swallowed the warehouse behind them, turning Hector's empire to ashes. The three of them, Ramon, Camila, and Valdez, stood at a distance, watching as the cartel's reign burned to the ground. The fight was over. But Ramon didn't feel relief, only exhaustion. Camila exhaled, still gripping the pistol Valdez had given her earlier. Her hands were steady now, not like before. She had changed. War did that to people. "We did it," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Valdez stretched his arms, letting out a slow whistle. Not bad for a bunch of old men and a city girl. Ramon ignored the comment. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon. The destruction of the cartel's headquarters would send a message, but that didn't mean the fight was over. Other men would try to take Hector's place. There was always someone waiting in the shadows. Camila turned to him. "What happens now?" Ramon wiped the blood from his brow. "We disappear," she frowned. "Disappear? After all this?" He met her gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Hector is dead, but if we stay, someone will come looking for us. It's not safe." Camila hesitated, glancing back at the fire. "I don't want to run." Ramon placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's not running, it's surviving." She didn't argue, not this time. Valdez rolled his shoulders. "I know a place, quiet, out of the way. No one will ask questions." Ramon studied him. "You really think we can just walk away?" Valdez smirked. "I think we've earned the right to try." They left before dawn. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. Ramon sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the landscape, his thoughts heavy. He had spent years trying to escape violence, to build a life free from the ghosts of his past. But in the end, violence had found him again. Would it ever truly leave him? Camila sat in the back, quiet. Ramon could feel the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. She had come here thinking she was visiting an old, stubborn uncle. Now she knew the truth. She had seen who he really was. After hours on the road, they stopped at a quiet, secluded ranch in the hills. It wasn't much, just a small house, a stable, and open land stretching beyond sight. But it was enough. Camila stepped out, looking around. "This could work," Ramon nodded. "It will." Valdez clapped him on the back. "Well, Salgado, you've got your piece. Try not to burn this place down too." Ramon smirked. "No promises." Camila turned to him. "And what about you? What do you do now?" Ramon exhaled, looking out over the land. "I rebuild." The war was over, but peace was something he would have to fight for every single day. Sometimes, the past we try to bury is the very thing that saves us. Ramon spent years running from his old life, believing he could escape violence. But when faced with those who threatened his home and family, he had no choice but to become the warrior he once was. In the end, he proved that true strength isn't about never fighting. It's about knowing when a fight is worth it. But what about you? If everything you loved was at stake, would you stand your ground or would you walk away? Click the video on the screen to continue your journey of self-discovery and explore more stories of resilience and courage. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story like this one. See you in the next video.